But in Leviticus chapter 15, we see very valuable medical information. Start reading in verse 1. We take this for granted today, but man has not always had this wisdom. Look at verse 1. It says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses and to Aaron, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When any man hath a running issue out of his flesh, because of his issue, he is unclean." Now, what do you say? What is an issue? Well, issue is talking about some kind of a fluid coming out of his body. We're talking about either blood or pus, and I'm not trying to be graphic tonight, but the Bible's being a little bit graphic here. It's talking about body fluids. You know, an issue of running issue out of his flesh. Because of his issue, he's unclean. This is kind of like what the Bible was mentioning in chapter 12. And this ties in with chapter 12. How a woman, after she gives birth, there's going to be blood from that continues to issue forth for many days or weeks following. And God is warning us that is unclean. Okay? And let's keep reading. It says in verse 3, "And this shall be his uncleanness and his issue, whether his flesh run with his issue, or his flesh be stopped with his issue, it is his uncleanness. Every bed whereon he lieth that hath the issue is unclean, and everything whereon he sitteth shall be unclean. And whosoever toucheth his bed shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. And he that sitteth on anything whereon he sat that hath the issue shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. And he that toucheth the flesh of him that hath the issue shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. And if he that hath the issue spit upon him that is clean, then he shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. And the saddle," what saddle? Like a saddle on a horse or an animal? "Soever he rideth upon that hath the issue shall be unclean. And whosoever toucheth anything that was under him shall be unclean until the even. And he that beareth any of those things shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until even. And whosoever he toucheth that hath the issue, and hath not rinsed his hands in water, he shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even." And on and on and on. And you say, "Well, that's boring. That's tedious." That could save your life. Yeah. This will literally keep you from dying. And literally, millions and millions of people have died since this book was written unto this day because of not understanding and reading Leviticus chapter 15. Because even just 200 years ago, this was not understood. 300 years ago. I mean, they would have a bed. You'd go to a hospital, and they put one sick person in the bed. And then just that person's done, put a new sick person in that bed. And then the doctors would wash their hands, not in running water. The Bible doesn't mention it here, but later on he's going to mention that they're to wash their hands in running water. They would have literally a basin of standing water. And doctors would deal with one surgery and deal with one victim, and then they would go back and dip their hands in a community wash basin. Wash their hands just to make them look, oh, they look clean. Dry them off, and then go stick their hands in the other person's wound. And then go back and wash. And I mean, they would have been better off not even washing their hands at all. Because they're just spreading germs. I mean, that basin just became just a breeding ground of germs and disease, just contaminating one person to another to another. They didn't care what the Bible said because they had science. Now look, I'm not against science, but there's what the Bible calls science falsely so called. But don't worry, my friends, because today scientists know everything. And today doctors don't do any stupid things. And everything they do now, they know everything. You know, of course, a couple hundred years ago, they were putting leeches on people. Did you know that the name for a doctor used to be called a leech? Did you know that? Who's ever read the book Ivanhoe? It's a real famous book. You ever read that book? In the book Ivanhoe, they just called called the leech. That's just what it was called back then, a leech. And my wife gets upset when I call doctors leeches. But the bottom line is that leeches were something that they thought would make you better. Put a leech on you, and it'll suck out your blood, because you have too much blood in your body. And we need to balance that out, so we need to do some bloodletting. This was science even in the United States of America. George Washington Right before he died, he'd gotten pneumonia because he was out riding his horse in the cold and wet, and he ate dinner in his wet clothes, and he got pneumonia, and he was old, and he was sick, and he died. And they sped up his death by basically bringing in the leech to drain his blood. But if they would have read the Bible, they would have known that the book of Leviticus says the blood is the life. And that blood is what keeps you alive. And that draining your blood is nowhere taught or found in the Bible. But it was man's wisdom, man's science, all the medical discoveries of their time period. But today we still think that doctor knows everything, Bible knows nothing. Wrong. The Bible could teach you more science and more medicine than what you could possibly imagine.
Amen.
Read chapter 13. Read chapter 14. Read chapter 15. And learn medicine. Learn science. And again, I'm not saying don't ever go to the doctor, but I'm saying this is the first place I'll go. I'll go here first. And if we would follow the sanitation in chapter 15 where he says, look, and this is long before they discovered about germs. He's saying, look, your spit contains germs. It'll be contagious. It'll spread disease. He said your spit, your body fluids, your clothes, even riding on a saddle. Even if you take off those clothes and hand them to somebody, and somebody carries the clothes from point A to point B, he said that person is unclean. That person needs to take a bath and bathe their flesh in water and be unclean until even. Not go deal with the next person. Not touch this person, touch that sick person, touch this sick person. And this is before germs were even known. I mean, the microorganisms causing diseases is something that's only from the last few hundred years. We take it for granted and say, oh, well, yeah, of course. Yeah, it's just common sense. Yeah, but the Black Plague in Europe wouldn't have been what it was if they would have understood and read this and known this. And it would have saved the lives of millions of people. But we blow it off and think it's not important. I wonder what important truths are in the book of Leviticus for us today in 2011 that we're blowing off like they blew off. Because we were too lazy to get through some of the offerings and read this book. It's a critical book, my friend. Go to chapter 16.